Oh my gosh, that's right. Okay, so my name is Allie Wilson, and today we're going to talk about visualizations with React and D3. Yeah, we are. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer at Inspire 11 as well, doing full stack development. Before Inspire, I worked at Deloitte, and before that in product at Vanguard. So I've done a little bit of consulting, product, different industries, including banking and Department of Defense and a bunch of other things. But yeah, and D3 has been a huge consistent in all of those jobs. So definitely a skill set I'm glad I've learned. I was a computer science major at the University of Michigan, so go blue if anyone, I know Maggie does not like that, but go blue. And I've done 5 years of D3 development and teaching. Fun things about me, I'm a huge fan of New Girl, Michigan basketball because Michigan football sucks, Ed Sheeran, Harry Potter, and gifts. So expect a lot of Harry Potter references in this presentation. What? You're a Hufflepuff. I am a Hufflepuff, so represent. Okay, so what is D3? So D3 stands for Data-Driven Documents, and it's a JavaScript library for manipulating documents based on data. So typically people call it a charting library. The founder and creator of D3 hates when people say that, but that in the context of today, we're going to call it a charting library. So it utilizes HTML, SVG, and CSS, things we're all very aware of and use pretty much every day in React. It is free and more flexible than other proprietary frameworks. So you may have heard of frameworks like Charts or liquid charts, things like that. What's nice about D3 is it is very versatile. If you can imagine it, you can pretty much make it. So whereas the proprietary frameworks, you're kind of stuck with their data structures, their visualizations, their animations, D3 you can really create whatever you want. And again, it's free, so that's huge. So you can do simple visualizations such as a pie chart, but you could also do very interactive and complex visualizations like a bar chart where you can select different values, you can do different filtering, you can do different animations, things like that. You can even do really strange things, such as the Mona Lisa histogram. So if you can see this, it's very weird. I saw this on the internet. I did not create this, but you can see the pixel values of Mona Lisa. Don't know when you need that, but maybe you would work for an art history museum and need to know the pixels in Mona Lisa. So like I said, if you can think of it, you can build it. And here are some examples. So I'm going to step through some minor examples, very simple examples, and then show kind of more of a complex chart. Okay, so this is a list of a dashboard that I created with very simple bar charts, donut charts, pie charts, basically any basic chart to showcase the animations you can do with D3. I refreshed the page and you can see all the different animations. So really all of this was customizable. I discovered what data structure worked best, basically said, okay, this is the colors I want, this is the animation I want, and it was really easy and simple to just create it. To have a more complex example, and the Harry Potter context comes into play. Here is a bar chart in which you can scroll. So this is perfect if you are on a dashboard and want to show a lot of information in a small space. Additionally, you can see how you can filter. So this just gives even more flexibility to your projects. Whereas with another library, you might be more restrained by their API. So then comes the question of, and the problem, and problems in quotes because, of course, given this talk, we're going to have a solution, but the problem of the virtual DOM. So a lot of people that have done D3, including myself in the past, D3 primarily in vanilla JavaScript manipulates the DOM itself. But when we have the virtual DOM in React, that puts a cog in the wheel. You can see in this example, hopefully it's zoomed in enough for people, but between lines 12 and 21, it's a script tag, and you can see how on line 13, D3 selects the body tag and appends an SVG. So really you are manipulating the DOM itself rather than having a virtual DOM. To show this example, this is just a simple code example, but you see this rectangle that starts in the top left and it's red and it transitions into a blue rectangle in the middle. So this is the code, only like 8 lines that generates that visualization. And this is an example in vanilla JavaScript. So as we see, D3 selects the body tag in the DOM, appends an SVG, and says, I want the SVG to be 500 pixels wide, 200 pixels tall. And then SVG appends a rectangle, tells it to be 80 by 80 and fill of red. Then there's a transition on line 18, and we say, okay, in this transition that's going to be 5 seconds or 5 milliseconds, grow it or shrink it and also turn it blue. So that's just kind of an example of traditional D3. This is what I was used to writing for years. But then we picked up a React project. I had done this in Angular and vanilla JavaScript, but React was a whole other beast. And so I was like, okay, how do we implement D3 in the virtual DOM? So I found that they are very compatible. It seems like they're not, but they are. So you can utilize a lot of React components. The code does tend to be a little bit longer than if you were to manipulate the DOM itself, but you can totally do it and make really incredible visualizations. So here's a code demo. For the sake of not overwhelming, we are not going to do a huge chart. This is a very, very basic chart. If I refresh the page, you'll see how the values grow over time. So I think it's within, I don't know, a few seconds. But anyway, so there's a transition element here. There are multiple bars, labels, and values. And I will hop into the code. Okay, we can see it. So I'm going to start at the parent container, which is barchart.tsx. Now I'm going to take a minute because I know all the React developers in the room are like, why are you using class components? You can do D3 with functional components, but it does get very messy very quickly. There's a lot of effects, a lot of side effects, callbacks. You need to know when the component mounts, when it unmounts, when it updates. And so just from my experience, it's been easier to use class components because that's very much built in and it's not all going to be all in one function. It's really easy to see. Also, you can have private variables, things like that just make it easier to select elements to render. But in order to not get too into the code, because D3's API is very well documented, I'm just going to generally go through this. Basically, on line 14, you can see how you can pass in props to this bar chart container. And basically, it makes it easy to reuse code. So let's say you wanted another bar chart that showed Big Ten football wins over the year. Like, you could reuse the same chart component and pass in whatever data you want, whatever height, width, color scale, margin, whatever you want. Color scale, if I wanted to decide that Ravenclaw is pink, I could change that in the color scale itself. In order to show what the data looks like, this is kind of just a very basic data structure. So you have a category and then a value, which is randomized. So in order to make sure that the pixels line up, so basically that your data fits within the viewport, which is the SVG, you create scales. So there's an X scale, a Y scale. I basically pass in the values that we have, and D3 auto-calculates to make sure it fits within the viewport. But then we get into the interesting and the React part. So this I did not create as its own component. The text that shows Hufflepuff, Slytherin, etc., pretty straightforward. It doesn't have state, it's just text, so you can just render it. But the bar with the transition does have its own state. So every time you render a bar, you want it to have that growing effect. So what I did is I created a bar component that takes in the initial width, which is 0, because you want it to start absolutely at 0, and then you want it to grow over time. So if I go into the bar component, you'll see, and this is where component did mount comes in handy. You select the private variable, which is the rectangle element. You transition the width into the final width. So in this case, the virtual DOM knows that there's going to be 4 bars, 1 for each house, but then the bar itself adjusts its width when it mounts. And very similarly, the bar value does the same thing. So you could always pass in this transition function as a prop, but in this case, I just kept it locally. But you would move the text as the component mounts. So going back to see a full view, this is about 78 lines of code with formatting. The more complex bar chart that I showed earlier would run you about 500. So still pretty complex, still pretty detailed, but you really have the versatility that you would want. Are there any questions?
So the dot transition function, how does it work in an event loop? Does it, like, when it's called, it just transitions? Just like it's, let's say, predetermined, or is it dynamic predetermined?
Yeah, that's a great question. So his question was, with transitions, can you do it in an event loop? Does it, like, automatically do it, or can you call it in an event loop, and is it deterministic? So you could definitely do it in an event loop. Like, let's say the bar is at 5 pixels, and then when you click a button, it would grow. That's definitely something you could do in a callback. The D3 transition element, or not element, function, really says whatever comes after this, do at a certain duration. So you could say, if it wasn't the color, you could say, like, I want to move it, like, in 5 different places, and it could do that, if that makes sense. Any other questions? Sorry, Brett, what?
I saw you had the password storybook.
Yeah.
Is that really interactive? Tell us about how you use that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so basically for those that haven't used Storybook before, it's a great place to try different components. We use it for our design libraries typically. So a good example of componentizing D3 to reuse across the app, I have created an Axis component that takes different props in. And I've also taken a container that adjusts so that it is responsive, and a legend component. So what's cool about using Storybook in this case is you can break up charts into different components, see how they interact, see all the different options. So basically, if you go to the docs page, which hopefully this is working, yeah, it shows all of the different props that you can send in. I'm using TypeScript in the app, so you can see all of these different options, what the types are. It makes it really easy to see how these chart components can be reused. So, big plug for Storybook. It's amazing.
So I noticed this is running off of
Yeah.
So Storybook is an open source NPM library?
Yeah, Storybook is an open source NPM library, completely free. So you can, you can just run it locally. So if I wanted to show the code, let's see if I can get it up. If I wanted to show the code, this is, like I said, the really long bar chart. And this is it completely like dissected out into separate components. The charts can get pretty large.
So basically you have, like, let's say an app, a React component and an app that calls other React components. That is taken by Storyboard and made that nice list on the side?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I go to barchart.stories.tsx, so Storybook automatically parses your files, looks for the stories.tsx, and creates just what you saw there. So you can pass it big data, you can tell it like exactly what props you want.
So it goes off the directory system, not the, but what if you like change, like, what if you have like bar chart stories to be called directly on the root node rendering?
Yeah, so you can actually, that's a great question. So his question was, is it based off of the directory structure? You can make it based off of the directory structure. Let me show this code. Basically, and in your stories.tsx file, you say where you want it. So visualizations would be the top folder, and then the second folder would be charts, and then bar chart. So I could have this in a completely different folder, and as long as I have that set out for Storybook, it would know. Cool. Any other questions? I think we're good. Okay. Thank you, everyone.